Now, over to the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. They're holding their national convention in Washington, and they'll be holding discussions this afternoon on a number of issues, including the relations between Islam and other religions. It's just getting started. Live coverage on C-SPAN 2.
Award by the Jewish Fellowship. He also received an award from the Muslim American Society Freedom Foundation. Please help me welcome Rabbi Joseph Rahal.
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Peace. No matter what the community is that I've been invited to speak to in the last several years, I've insisted on using at least those three words, sometimes others as well, because I want us all to remind ourselves that even if we think we're in a room where they're all or practically all Jews, or all or practically all Christians, or all or practically all Muslims, it ain't so. The planet is too small and too fragile for us to forget in every room we sit in, all our religious traditions are in fact present in all our communities. And I think it's important for us to remind ourselves of that in whatever room we think we are sitting. Thank you. Do I do anything? Just hold it. So, there's several things I want to accomplish in this 15 minutes or so. One is I want to talk about why it is that some people view religion as the root of violence and ugliness and terror and war in the world, while others view it as peacemaking and compassionate. And it seems to me that what has happened is, and this happens over and over again, that a community arises that realizes it can be in touch with the one, the unity that is at the root of the universe. And so as not to allow this connection to be forgotten or obliterated or ignored, it creates rituals and practices and metaphors and languages to transmit it to others and to future generations. Fine. And then this community meets another community which claims to be in touch with the unity, the one, but has a whole different set of rituals and practices and metaphors and festivals. And there are two profoundly different responses that some people make. One is, oh, you're obviously wrong. We got it right, and you have a whole different bunch of things. You obviously are not really in touch with the one. And what's more, you claim to be, so you're really liars and destroyers. And the other response is, oh, well, of course the one is infinite. And of course the infinite can only be refracted in society and even in all the life forms of our planet through diversity. How else could the infinite beyond become visible, touchable to us? Let us learn from each other. And of course, that's what this session is committed to do. But we should be aware that all our traditions have in them the bloody streaks of the other response. All our traditions. The Hebrew Scriptures and the Talmud, the Quran, the Gospels, even, though people find it hard to believe sometimes, the Buddhist tradition, even. So we need in every generation again and again and again to reopen ourselves to the wisdom of, oh, well, of course, the infinite is expressed through diversity. Let us learn with each other, from each other. The second thing I want to talk about is the difference between what might be called top-down interfaith relationship and grassroots-up interfaith relationship. We are witnessing right now the fear, and I honor the fear, that in societies where the top-down control has kept various religious communities at enough distance so that they don't tear each other's throats out, that if the top-down control vanishes, that there might be the version of, well, you're wrong, you're liars, you're killers, you're destroyers, and we must kill you first. I understand that fear. I remember how when top-down control collapsed in Yugoslavia, in fact, ethnic and religious communities did claw at each other's throats. And I remember how the worst suffering was probably in the Muslim community. And I understand how facing in Egypt, in maybe Bahrain, which has tried to reinforce that top-down control, in Syria, in other societies bubbling now with energy from the grassroots, I understand the fear that if the center collapses, there will be this kind of violent attack. And yet, I think with our mouths open, frightened but hopeful at the same time, it is important for us to try to move forward to the kind of relationship between our communities that comes from the grassroots. That where the grassroots are bursting with energy, as they are in large parts of the world that Arab Americans, American Arabs, see as deep, passionate, emotional connection, that we do our best to encourage the Jews, the Christians, the Muslims, the different kinds of Muslims, Sunni and Shia, of that region, to try to remember that the differences between them are refractions of infinity, and to hold open the possibility that from the bottom, where the top is either collapsing or using ultra-violence, that from the bottom, those communities can stay in compassionate connection, sacred connection with each other. Not easy, and I understand and feel compassion for all those who feel frightened in that process. And still, it seems to me that the nonviolence that has been so, not absolute, but so much the majority response of the grassroots communities in Egypt, in Syria, that incredibly brave, tens of thousands of people braving fire, being fired on by the army from helicopters and coming back into the streets unarmed, that if anything does indeed reflect the compassionate one, Rahman, that response does. and that we must do our best to encourage that nonviolent response, not only toward the violent top, but toward the other communities. And finally, I want to come back to America, because it seems to me that in dealing with this violence and the possibility of nonviolence in that region of the world, there are only two chunks of American society that care enough to make a difference. One has been doing its making a difference for a long time. That's big oil and the military. They absolutely care. And the result has been a mess. There is one other set of communities of Americans who do care. Muslims, Christians, and Jews do care. And in the majorities of each of those communities, there are people who want peace, who want, for instance, between the nascent, emerging Palestine and Israel, a decent peace settlement. A majority of real flesh and blood American Jews want that. A majority of real flesh and blood American Christians want that. And a majority of real flesh and blood American Muslims want that. It's true that established top-down institutions in the Jewish world, some of them, not all, and in the Christian world, the people call Christian Zionists, and some in the Muslim world don't want that and reject the pathway that would make it possible for there to be peace between Israel, a new Palestine, and the other Arab states, as now the Arab League, with the Arab Peace Initiative of several years ago, and now the Israeli Peace Initiative, coming not only from the usual suspects, peaceniks, professors, artists, intellectuals, but from people who have been at the heart of the Israeli security system, pleading. Just last week, the head of the Mossad, hardly a soft-hearted, Arab-loving peacenik, said on leaving the Mossad that he is desperately worried that the craziness of the Israeli governmental leadership will lead it to take crazy acts without him and a few others there to say, no, 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 no. So there is real energy there and here. And it seems to me that there are two issues in the world that it is really urgent for American Muslims, Christians, and Jews to address together. One is that, and the other one is indeed our fragile planet. That is, this society is the one that is endangering the framework, the fabric, the weave of life on this planet most desperately by its crazed overuse, overburning, idolatry, and addiction, overburning of fossil fuels. And if there is one thing our traditions can, in fact, agree on, it is to join in protection of God's creation. All of us believe that and need to act together. And the other one is a lot harder, because our emotional and ethnic as well as religious traditions tug us in what at times seem to be absolutely contradictory directions. And yet I do not think that what is happening there and here will be able to have decent outcomes unless American Jews, American Christians, and American Muslims, the majorities of each community, can join together to insist that the American government insists on a decent peace there, as well as a decent respect and healing for all the life forms on planet Earth.
Rabbi. Toda Rabba. We'll leave the questions till later. Let me now introduce the very Reverend Joseph Rahal. Rahal, right? Is a senior pastor at St. George's Antiochian Church in Washington, D.C. He was born in Syria and received his education in the Middle East and the U.S. He served in parishes and was the founder and pastor of churches in several cities in North America. He's the author of 5 books on religious topics in Arabic and English. The very Reverend Joseph Rahal has met with a number of world leaders and participated in conflict resolution in the Middle East, including efforts to release American hostages. Please help me welcome Reverend Rahal.
Thank you very much. I just found out the day before yesterday that I'm going to speak today, so it's such a short time. It is an honor and a privilege to participate in this panel of distinguished panelists, Imam Yahya Hendi, and of course, Rabbi Arthur Waskow. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I was born in Damascus, Syria, and I grew up in a community composed of Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Throughout my schooling in elementary, secondary, and high school, I had friends from all 3 religions. Throughout those years, we never felt that we were different from each other. On the contrary, we grew up with a certain bond of love and friendship. Our Antiochian Orthodox Christian Archdiocese of North America, under the leadership of His Eminence Metropolitan Philip, whom I represent, was and still is on the forefront of religious tolerance in North America. Dearborn, Michigan, has the largest concentration of Islamic community in the U.S., of which community and religious leaders are constantly integrating their events and major celebrations with our Orthodox churches in the area and vice versa. We live in a world of religious pluralism. There are approximately 2 billion Christians, more than 1 billion Muslims, about 700 billion Hindus, 350 million Buddhists, and about 14 million Jews. It would seem that religious tolerance is a necessity if we are going to get along together. Our Christian faith teaches us so. When Christ gave the parable of the Good Samaritan, who had compassion and helped a wounded Jew, he was teaching us about religious tolerance. When he taught us to love our enemies, he was speaking of religious tolerance. Religious tolerance is especially important here in the United States, since we have such a variety of people and cultures from all over the world. We are blessed to live in a country that grants us the right to practice our faith openly and freely. That is why forums such as this and others are vitally important. They provide us with an opportunity to engage in dialogue that will advocate and promote God's message of peace and love among all the people. God created the world out of His infinite love, mercy, and goodness. And it is to this call that we, as the religious leaders in our communities, encourage our constituents in the virtues of tolerance and peace. Mutual love and respect for the right of others are necessary as a precondition to living in peace. The values of civilizations and cultures changes depending on economic, political, racial, and national conditions. The Christian understanding and authority of morality remains always true to a divine revelation, and the fullness of God-given vocation is to practice the commandment of love. Whether we are Christians, Muslim, or Jews, we're all the children of God. And as religious leaders, we must communicate this in words and deeds, our love and tolerance for all God's children. The world is a diversity of belief and opinions. Faith and politics have become a blended whole. And practicing religion tolerance has become essential to living an open-minded, tolerant life. In conclusion, the way I see God is through your faces. Since our Lord taught us that if you have done it to the least of these my brethren, you have done it unto me. I want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to be here today. And just a little footnote that on my staff in my church, I have 3 people on my staff. One is a Roman Catholic, one is a Protestant, and one is Muslim. And we get along very, very well, and we work together very well. Thank you again.
Last but not least, I have the pleasure to introduce Imam Yahya Hendi. He is the Muslim chaplain at Georgetown University, the first American university to hire a full-time Muslim chaplain. He is also the Muslim chaplain at the National Medical Center in Bethesda, Maryland. Imam Hendi is also the president of Clergy Beyond Borders. He teaches at Georgetown University and Johns Hopkins on comparative religions. Imam Hendi also serves as a member of the Islamic Jurisprudence Council of North America. He has written on many topics, including women in Islam and Islam in the United States. Imam Hendi has spoken about these and other topics to audiences around the world. In 2002, Imam Hendi received the prestigious Hartford Seminary Award, a James Gattamy Significant Ministry Award, for his work to promote peace building between people of different religions. Please help me welcome Imam Hendi.
Well, 3, 2, 1. Well, I told you. Maybe it's not well. It's my honor to be with you this afternoon, to try to engage you on something that is very important to me. I always say that if they were to look into my blood cells, they would find red cells, white cells, and interfaith dialogue cells. Not only because I was born in Palestine and to wonderful parents, and my father was a school teacher. He used to teach in Bethlehem back in the 50s, and he used to have a copy of the Christian Bible in Arabic. So I grew up reading the Christian Bible in Arabic. I had some idea about the Christianity, but not fully. I was born in a very small town called Kifl Haris, believed historically to be the place where Joshua was buried. And so I am used to Jews coming into Kifl Haris once a week to pray at the tomb of Joshua. So I grew up in encountering those religions. Did not have more details about them till I came to the US and intentionally decided to do my second master's degree, having done Islamic studies, in Christian studies. And intentionally decided to go to a Christian seminary, to live with Christians, to know exactly how Christians from within think. I did not want Muslims to tell me what the Christianity is or is not. And I learned a lot, and I learned a great deal, and I learned how the Quran and the Christian Bible have a lot in common, Recently, I produced a DVD about Judaism, Christianity, and Islam more in common than you think. And the idea was to just tell the audience out there that, yes, we have differences, but we do have so many commonalities, even from the scriptures themselves. And for my PhD work, my focus was on Jewish studies. And the study of the three religions helped me, I believe, become a better person in so many ways, and a better imam. So this is a part of my experience that sort of got me engaged with interreligious dialogue issues. I always say how nations meet at their borders, religions meet at their heart, and the heart of all religions is love. And therefore, there is a way for religions to meet at their heart. Because I believe at the heart of Islam, if we take our time to study it from within, we find a lot of love there. And at the heart of Judaism, you'll find a lot of love. At the heart of Christianity, you'll find a lot of love. And we can meet at this cross point of love. After all, we all talk about Shema Yisrael, Adonai Elohino, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, our Lord God, God is one. And when Jesus was asked about the best of all commandments, he said a few things, including, Hear, O Israel, our Lord God, God is one. And I always say when I speak in synagogues that Elohino Echad, Mishbacha Echad, meaning one God, one family. Not only the family of Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac, and by the way, I am critical of those who only talk about Abraham and refrain from talking about Sarah and Hagar, as if only men matter. We always talk about we are the children of Adam, and we forget Eve. And it's a problem in the three traditions. And we have to reconstruct our theology and our religious language when we speak of God, not He, but God the living. And not only Adam, but also Eve. And not only Abraham, but also Sarah and Hagar. All of them matter in the religious tradition. I always talk about how Mary is mentioned in the Quran 34 times, and there are so many Muslim theologians who attribute to her the title of prophecy. So not only men can be prophets, but also females can be prophets and can speak for God on earth. So this one God and one family reminds me of that biblical narrative, but also in the Quran, that we come from dust to dust, we shall be returned. Imam Hendi, where are you from? I'm from dust. Where is that country? Okay, what's your nationality? I'm Dustian. I'm American too, but I'm Dustian. That has come to shape my theology and my politics. And my politics, I mean that exactly. That is to say, I am the brother and I am the fellow Dustian of the Jew and the Christian and the Muslim, the man and the woman and the Buddhist and the Hindu and the atheist. The atheist is also my brother and is also my sister, because we all come from dust, whether we like it or not. To dust we shall be returned. So how can this theology of Dustianship bring us together to realize that if the origin is the same and the destiny is the same, the bridge has to unite between us? And is it doable? It is indeed doable. The problem is when we speak of an exclusive God, and we all have done that, politically, religiously, and socially. I say that God is not a real estate agent and must not be a real estate agent, where Jerusalem is only Jewish, and you Christians and Muslims get out of there, and only us can be the guards of the city of Jerusalem. It's Jewish, has always been, and will always be. I say that's bad theology, and that's bad politics. But it is as bad to say that it is a Muslim city on the expense of the Jews and the Christians, or it's a Christian town on the expense of the Jews, of the Muslims and the Jews. It is a town for all. And God is not a real estate agent. And God loves all of us, and God made that city holy for all of us and sacred for all of us. And therefore, I bring to the fore table here how the sacredness of the land depends on the sacredness we hold in our hearts regarding each other. The land can never be sacred if we do not consider the Jews sacred and the Christians sacred and the Muslims sacred. It's quite important to keep that in mind, that no one will leave that land, and everyone will live in that land and will share that land. The sacredness of the land is not about the building of temples, but rather the building of sacred presence for each other. I love the statement from Prophet Muhammad, who said that the sacredness of the human being is more honored in the eyes of God than the sacredness of the Kaaba in Mecca. So let the Kaaba go, but do not let the blood of a human being go. So can Jews live up to those standards? And can Christians live up to those standards? Can Muslims live up to those standards? Is quite very, very important. Can we adopt what I call a global humanitarian action together? A global humanitarian action that creates a culture of passion for compassion. Compassion for all, for men and for women, for those who are in and those who are out. Well, at the end of the day, only that culture of passion for compassion can bring us together fully united with intensity, with positive intensity between us. There's so many things we can do together. Our ability to fight trafficking. Thousands of women are sold to slavery and sex every day. We all can work together to fight that. Domestic violence, child abuse, extremism in the name of the three religions. We all can come together to create that culture of passion for compassion and a global humanitarian action to push for that. We also need what I would call our ability to heal history. Our ability to heal history. My friends, my brothers, and my sisters, we always talk about the Crusades. We always talk about what Muslims did in Constantinople. And we always talk about what the Jews did here and there. And I say, please, do not allow the bitterness of yesterday paralyze the possibilities of tomorrow. I studied history as a theologian, and I can go with so many data about what Jews did to Christians and to Muslims, and what Muslims did to Jews and the Christians, and the crusade and colonialism and so many data. What can we do for the future? Can we learn from the past only to build a better future? Can we go back to the future? Only go back to learn how to become better brothers and sisters and how to celebrate differences. And this is where I may end up. How to celebrate differences. I learned in my practice as an imam who's always asked to give homilies in the Christian services and speech in Sabbath services in churches. I learned how to celebrate things I may not have in my own tradition. Muslims do not believe that Jesus died on the cross. But I see that whole concept of Jesus dying for our redemption a very valuable value for all of us. After all, we all need to crucify ourselves, to sacrifice, to sacrifice for others to live. We all do that as parents. We all do that as workers. We all do that as mothers and as fathers. We need to sacrifice for others to live. So can I find a value in something that is not a part of my theology and learn from it and be inspired by it? Can a Jew and a Christian come to the mosque and learn about the beauty of the message of Muhammad and find some value in it that he or she can learn from, can be inspired by? We just finished at my home. I have a little pond in the backyard, and I went to Home Depot to buy flowers and different roses to plant around the pond. And my kids were asking me, Baba, why do you have all of these 9 colors? And I said, kids, they remind me of the human family. Yellow, white, pink, brown, all kinds of colors. God created all of us. And God wants all of us to exist next to one another. And what makes my pond beautiful is the presence of all of these colors around it. So how can we come to realize the potential of celebrating differences as something to teach us that in diversity lies our unity? And maybe here is where America could remember on a daily basis the prayer that we all do, that my kids do. We pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. One nation with all of us. It's not a Judeo-Christian country. It's a Judeo-Christian Muslim country. And it's a Judeo-Christian Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Baha'i, atheist country. It's for all of us. One nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all of us. Whereas when something happens in a synagogue in Philadelphia and someone attacks it, it should be the Muslims and the Christians saying no. And when something happens to a mosque in Greenville, South Carolina, it should be the Christians and the Jews saying no. And when something happens to Christians in Egypt or in Syria, it should be all of us saying no to that. Because at the end of the day, we are one nation under God, indivisible with liberty and justice for all, and not for only one community. I want to finish with a story that happened with me a few years ago. I used to be the Imam of the Islamic Society of Frederick, Maryland. And a journalist went to meet with the rabbi there and asked him about if he would be willing to open dialogue with the Muslim community. And he said, absolutely not. The guy came, interviewed me, and asked me. I said, of course I'll be interested in meeting with the Jewish community. Actually, I have been trying for 3 years, and I have failed. He went back to the rabbi. Well, Imam says, if you are willing, he's willing to come and visit with you. And the rabbi said, every time he comes, I will slap the door in his face. That ended up on cover article in the Frederick Post. And imagine what that did to our community in Frederick, Maryland. Not good business. However, it created a new positive spirit where the religious communities stood up to say, that is not Frederick, Maryland. The Jewish community came to apologize to me in the mosque. And I said, please do not apologize. I love you no matter what that person does. I said, let us turn this negative spirit into a positive experience. They said, what can we do? I said, well, it's November. Can we organize a Hajj that Muslims will be celebrating soon, and Hanukkah festival? Hanukkah Hajj festival. Oh, a good idea. Let's do it. It brought together 200 Jews and Muslims. A wonderful experience that engaged our kids, especially our kids, the leaders of tomorrow. The Christians did not like it. Well, next year, we're going to have Hanukkah Hajj Christmas festival. And we brought together 700 Jews, Christians, and Muslims to celebrate something so unique in each tradition, but in a way that brought all of us together. We can do it. That's America. That's our religions. But that is our hearts. The challenge is within you. Can we make it or not? And I dare to say, yes, we can, and yes, we will.
I'll to ask different. And the spokeswoman for the English language broadcasting service in Syria was asked about the torture incident involving actually 2 Syrian children. And the PBS journalist was asking her what she thought of that, how she felt about it. And her response was, she did not deny that there was torture. In fact, now it's being investigated by the authorities in Syria. So she did not deny it, but she actually pointed to, she said, yes, maybe it happened. Well, you have torture in the US, don't you? And she mentioned Guantanamo. To this, I'd like to ask a question to any of our speakers. Do you believe that this image that has been perpetuated in the rest of the world, that our role has maybe encouraged dictators in the rest of the world to get away with things that are really, really ugly, like torture? And, you know, here in the United States, the Arab and Muslim community felt being targeted, that they were being targeted after 9/11. Do you feel that that this trend is changing in any way, and how can we changing in any way, and how can we contribute to getting away from that? Rabbi?
3 weeks after the front page revelations of what was happening in Abu Ghraib, I was asked by a public relations firm here in the U.S. if I would be willing to appear with Imam Abdul Rauf and with a former head of a Protestant theological seminary and with a Catholic nun, the four of us, to make a broadcast into the Arab world, to be broadcast on Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, saying that the religious communities of the United States stood together in absolute rejection of the use of torture by the United States government. And we did that. And so far as I'm concerned, one of the worst aspects of the present administration of the United States is that it has refused to treat, either as criminal or sinful, those actions when they happened, or if perhaps they continue to happen. When we made that broadcast, one of the things I'm proud of is that the PR firm used only legal language, right? Torture is criminal, it violates the Constitution. I said, we are four religious folk here. Can we use the word sin? They said, the other three said, well, absolutely. And the PR guy said, oh, right, I guess, yeah. Well, the notion that has been put forward, and I say this with shame and horror, by the President of the United States, that we must look forward, not backward, would mean, if you carried that out, that no murderer could ever be tried for anything, because it was always in the past. How would you possibly go back instead of going forward? Well, the only way a society has of saying this is sin and this is crime is to treat it that way, continuing into after it may have stopped.
I want to only add to that we all have to have the courage to have a prophetic voice when we speak against torture, all forms of torture, from all. Whether the torture carried out by the US government, or by an Arab regime in a jail, or by Jews in the state of Israel, or Palestinians, to their own brothers and sisters sometimes. So we all have that courage, and we have to have it very loud and heard. All forms of torture is absolutely unacceptable, whether done by Jews, Christians, or Muslims.
Amen.
Please, if you have any questions, is there a microphone that we can pass around? Or if you will, just stand up, or you don't have to stand up, just speak a little bit loudly. Please.
You told us a beautiful example of turning a negative. It's me? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought someone else was supposed to talk. I was thinking. I said that the Imam gave us a real great example of turning a negative experience to a positive experience. And my really question is, what happened to that? Is it still going on? Is it one time? And usually a lot of good starters, a lot of good, events happening all over, a lot of good people here and there, but there is something always stopped and no continuation of this to have a snowball of these kind of positive experiences.
Well, number one, we need to be proactive and not only reactive. That's number one. Number two, when we start something, we need to continue doing it. And yes, it has been happening for the last, I think, 6 years now. It happens every year and it grows, and it has become a movement, actually, in Frederick County. So one of the wonderful experiences there is that it was an Orthodox synagogue. And when we were dialoguing about the program, I wanted to bring a Reform synagogue on board, and the Orthodox said, well, no way. It's only us or no one. I said, well, I'm not going to make that decision between Jews, either all Jews or none. And for the first time in the history of that county, were Orthodox and Reform Jews coming together in one event, and continued to create a wonderful spirit between Jews themselves. So yes, it has been continuing, and it needs to continue. It brought out, it gave a birth to a new idea called Caravan of Reconciliation that we are working on now. It's an actual bus that will be touring 13 states in Northeast, from Washington, D.C. on September 11, all the way down to Georgia, to Tennessee, up to Michigan, and we will finish at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. It's an actual bus, and on it we will have 2 rabbis, 2 priests and ministers, and 2 imams. 3 of them will rotate, will get off, and get another 3 in the town next town. Between Washington and Philadelphia, we would hope would have had at least 500 clergy who have been on that bus with one message: clergy for reconciliation, to create a movement of reconciliation in America. We are taking the same bus to the Middle East. Well, now we are talking to Jordan and to Kuwait and Saudi Arabia to have a clergy travel from America to the Middle East with one spirit of reconciliation.
I'd like to join in with another example of something that can be done and continued and continued. As we move toward the first anniversary of 9/11, the Shalom Center invited about 15 or 16 people, equally divided among Jews, Christians, and Muslims, to meet for a 4-day retreat on the first anniversary. And the people came together, named themselves the Tent of Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah, drawing on an ancient oral tradition that the family of Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah kept their tent open in all 4 directions, so that if they saw a traveler coming from anywhere who was thirsty or hungry, they could be welcomed instantly. Didn't even have to wait till they got to the tent. You could see them coming from afar. And that was the kind of tent we intended to create. Now, my wife, who's also a rabbi, and I had been invited to a number of interfaith things. One of them by the World Council of Churches in Geneva. And we spent a week with amazing people from all over the world. And there was no dialogue. Each of the people sat on a platform and talked about dialogue, and there was no dialogue. So Phyllis, my wife, Rabbi Phyllis Berman, said, look, if we're going to get these folks together, it is not going to be like that. And she said, what we're going to do is, the first thing that's going to happen is everybody's going to take 15 minutes to talk about their own spiritual journey that got them to this place. And then each one is a human being. And one is a human being who's a Muslim, and another one is a human being who's a Christian, and so on. But if all of us were human beings, and we could hear the differences within that context of the spiritual journey. And our spiritual journeys were all different too. But they were all hearable. And that made an incredible difference. We ended up being able to break one of the, it's sort of unwritten, but practically written rules of interfaith dialogue. Never try to pray together, because somebody will get mad. Because either it'll be inauthentic or it'll be exclusive. Well, we were able to figure out ways to pray together that were authentic to each tradition, not least common denominator, and also inclusive. But that was possible because of the way we've begun. Now, why did I want to chime in to say this? Because this is something that doesn't need even a bus. It needs a dozen, 15, no more than 20 people, and a place where you can sit together quietly for 2, 3, 4 days. And it could be, and it doesn't, do it yourselves. I mean, it doesn't need the Shalom Center or anybody to organize it. It needs people who know each other to get together to do it. And if we had our druthers all over, at least North America, and it would be really wonderful if it happened in other regions of the world as well. But the First Amendment was one of God's best creations, and it made it a lot easier for us all to do this kind of thing. For us all, if there were hundreds, thousands of tents, whatever they called themselves, tents of Abraham, Hagar, and Sarah, with the 4 flaps of the tent open to all the communities. That would change American life. It would change even American foreign policy.
I have a microphone over here, and I'm next. My name is Barbara Taft, and I live in Mesa, Arizona. And I just want to mention that in regard to what Rabbi Waskow said, there's a book that he was one of the co-authors of called The Tent of Abraham. And it happens to be what I'm currently reading, just by chance.
It came out of that. That was one of the results of that grouping.
Yes. And
the publishers said adding Hagar and Sarah would make the title too long. So we gave up and we let them get away with just calling it the Tent of Abraham.
Right. My first introduction to Rabbi Waskow's work was by somebody who told me about this, and I organized at my church a dialogue between an Orthodox Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim imam who actually discussed specific faith traditions that are related to one another, but that many of the people did not understand were related, and it was highly successful. And I just want to recommend this book to everyone here and suggest that all of the panelists are very much involved in interfaith dialogue, and if any of you are not involved in it, you really should be. Thank you so much.
I think we have time for maybe 2 or...
I want to continue on that.
Okay, sorry.
No, I just want to
Briefly, please.
give a little comment about what we were discussing before. And it is appalling that the world courts and United Nations, too, that they are so fast to condemn, probably rightly so, some Arab countries of doing atrocities, where when it's the same thing done by Western countries, we never mention anything. And that's really appalling to see that. Unless we, on the United Nations level and World Court, treat everybody alike and the same for the same crime, we can never reach a resolution to this issue of torture.
Next question, please, over there.
I have the mic.
Here he is. Yes.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. You'll be next.
Hello. Yes. I just actually have one comment, then probably a question. My first comment is
Brief, so we'll have another.
okay. It's in reference to your comment, what you said about the 2 kids and the Syrian TV. I think it's important to notice and to admit that it's shameful and it's sad. Can you not hear me? It's shameful and sad that it is often, whenever someone questions such atrocities or such crimes that are committed, that people always neglect to, instead of trying to address the specific issue, they refer to a different atrocity that happened somewhere else. So if you talk about the thousands of people that are being killed or were killed in Egypt, in Tunisia, currently in Syria, and in Yemen, then immediately they go around and say, well, wait a second, what about the thousands of people that were killed in Gaza in 2008? I think this is a bit shameful. You know, we always go back to someone else's problem and just try to use that as a justification. It's not because people were killed, sadly killed, and there were atrocities committed in Gaza, that it's okay that things are happening in Syria right now, for example. So that's, and the same thing when we're talking about torture, they refer to Abu Ghraib. We talk about imprisonment and unjust imprisonment. They talk about Guantanamo Bay. So I think this is a very important point that we should not neglect. And I think a lot of people have the obligation to talk against such behaviors. And number two, I really wanted to hear Father Rahal's opinion about what is happening in Syria, being Syrian himself, and having lived and having talked about religious tolerance and how Syria was and how it is right now, and his views about what is happening.
Do you mind if we have the last question, and we'll try to answer both?
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Reem Odi. I'm from San Francisco. I'm really happy to see everybody, especially Abuna, Father Rahal. My question is on Christian Zionism, and it deeply moves me to see all these people following this type of, ideology. And I think maybe I'll point this question to Father Rahal. What are we doing as Christians and also a rabbi for the Jews? What are we doing to combat this, and what are the strategies? Is it the leaders need to speak up? What can we do? Because a lot of people are following this blindly, this ideology, and that's just creating a lot of animosity and a lot of mistruths about what's happening. So thank you.
Our time is actually over, but please, since we started late, take just a couple of minutes to answer, please.
Go ahead.
Why don't you, if she's talking about Christian Zionism, you try.
Christian Zionism. I don't believe in those Christian Zionism. So I think they completely misinterpret the Bible. Completely. They miss the points. They, in our, the way we understand the Bible and the New Testament is that Jesus Christ came to save us from our sins. So thus, everything that's written, every word, every sentence, every chapter, is to be interpreted in the light of that message. And when they go outside of it and they misinterpret these things, anybody could misinterpret anything. And that's why they are really way out of the realm and way out of the circle that the majority of Christians do believe. So they are completely missed the point of what the Christian message is.
What can we do, like Metropolitan Philadelphia? I mean, we need the leaders to speak out.
We cannot. This is a free world. They could say whatever they want. All we could explain our point and let the people, see which way to go. And about the question of the gentleman over there is, first of all, I follow the news, especially because I'm from Syria. I follow the news of Syria more than anything else. The only problem with that is we are really not getting proper news from Syria. We have no idea. Somebody says children are tortured. I'm not sure who tortured them. I really don't know. I know from talking to people in Syria over the phone, which, sometimes you cannot speak very freely on the phone, but in certain circumstances, people from the protesters were shooting at other people's protesting to have casualties, so they could say, so people will start fighting each other. And I'm not sure about the news. The problem is we don't have accurate news. So how could we form an opinion if we don't have accurately what we see many things on YouTube, and but are we sure what we are seeing? I don't know.
One last word from any of the speakers?
I wanted maybe to say when forgotten James Jones wanted to burn the Quran in Florida, there was a huge cry out in the Arab world that Christianity is against Islam and Christians are against Islam. I disagree with that. So many Christians spoke very loud against the act of that guy. And I want to refer only to an evangelical church in Tennessee organized a meeting called Burn a Candle, Not a Quran, in defense of the Quran. 700 Christians, mainly evangelicals, came together, fully united in defense of the Quran and with a voice of sanity. What I'm saying is sometimes we label people and give them labels are not really real. We need to dive into the other, understand the other from within, and open doors of communication with them. That does help.
Thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking our panelists. Enjoy the rest of the convention.
Thank you. Imam.
The job is to educate them.
It has to be the power people like
You are the
leaders.
You are the power. This is one-on-one.
Good. Those people are from
Been doing
TV show.
I've been doing 47 years. It's the only way you can wrong. You're going to teach them.
It has to be, and in my opinion, it has to be from the leaders.
The American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee holding its national convention in Washington. A couple of panels coming up. The next one will be about civil rights, and the last one about the uprisings in the Middle East this past spring. We'll have those live for you once they get underway. Just looking ahead to the weekend on C-SPAN and our Road to the White House coverage, continuing with former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson, who's running for the GOP nomination. Also at cspan.org in our featured links section, we have a link to the Anchorage Daily News coverage of the release of Sarah Palin's emails that are being released this afternoon. Her emails as her term as governor. You can find those in featured links at cspan.org. Well, again, they will resume with a couple of more panel discussions.